If you met me today, you would only see a 6-year-old woman named Gloria, sitting peacefully on her porch in Dayton, smiling at her pots of thriving medicinal herbs. You'd see a retired restaurant owner, a respectable grandmother, but you would never guess that 40 years ago I was kneeling on the filthy floor of a brothel, trying to scream through the agony and begging them not to rip my newborn son from my arms. They took him. They sold him. And they sold me. This is the true story of how I was sold into slavery at 15, and how, 35 years later, that stolen son returned, as a lawyer, to get justice for us both. If you believe that even from hell, people can find their way home, subscribe and listen to my story. I was born in Harlan County, in the heart of Kentucky, at a time when a poor girl didn't have many choices in life. It was either marry young, work the fields, or be a maid in someone else's house. I was the fourth of 8 siblings. My mother, bless her heart, worked miracles to feed that flock of mouths with the little my father brought home from working in the coal mines. Life was hard, but it had its moments of joy. We played in the dirt yard, bathed in the rain when the sky decided to be generous, ate unripe apples with a sprinkle of salt when hunger gnawed between meals. It was poverty with dignity, as my mother used to say, until the day the world came crashing down on our heads. I was 11 years old when my father died. It was on a regular workday at the mine. He worked from dawn till dusk, the sun beating down on his head, only stopping to eat the lunch my mother prepared before dawn. That day, they said he collapsed from exhaustion, a victim of a mine collapse. When they brought his body home, my mother screamed in a way that has never left my ears. That was the day my childhood ended for good. The very next day, I was already helping more at home, taking care of my younger siblings, and within a month, I knew that school was no longer a possibility for me. Hunger is a terrible thing. It doesn't knock on the door. It invades your house without asking permission. With my father dead and 8 mouths to feed, my mother couldn't cope. That's when, at 12 years old, I started working in the houses of the wealthy families right there in Harlan County. I washed clothes, cleaned yards, helped in the kitchen. I would come home with a handful of coins or with leftover food wrapped in a cloth napkin. Sometimes I'd get an old piece of clothing from the lady of the house that would be huge on me, but it was clean clothes. School was left behind, and so were the games. I grew up before my time, like thousands of girls in this country. I remember looking at a shard of mirror I had nailed to the wall of our shack and seeing a little girl with the eyes of an adult. My hands were already calloused before I was 13. My hair was always tied in a messy ponytail, my fair skin already marked by the sun and hard labor. I didn't complain. I didn't have that luxury. But deep down, very deep down, I dreamed of another life. I would see the girls from school in their clean uniforms and wonder what it would be like to study, to learn to read properly, to have a notebook of my own. It's funny how small you dream when you don't know anything better. Life went on like that, between family homes, cleaning, washing, taking care of other people's children, until an offer came that seemed like a miracle. I was 15 when Mrs. Margaret, a lady who was visiting relatives in Harlan County, heard about me. She lived in Cleveland, the big city, and was looking for a girl to work in her house. A trustworthy, hard-working girl is what she said when she showed up at our house. My mother cried with emotion. Cleveland, the big city, a salary every month, guaranteed food. It was like winning the lottery for country folk like us. I packed my bundle, 2 changes of clothes, a comb, the rosary that belonged to my grandmother, an old photograph of the whole family when my father was still alive. My mother hugged me tightly and said, "Go, my girl, find your fortune and send money when you can." I promised I would, that I would help the family, that I would write letters, even though I barely knew how to write, that one day I would come back to get everyone. Dreaming is free, isn't it? And at that moment, I was full of them. It's the kind of hope that can light up the darkest of circumstances, but it can also blind you to the dangers lurking in the shadows. Gloria was stepping onto that bus with a heart full of dreams, completely unaware she was being led into a gilded cage. Let's follow her to Cleveland to see what awaited her. The trip to Cleveland was the first time I ever left Harlan County. The world was too big, frightening. The Greyhound bus pulled away from the small station, hit the main highway, and I watched the Appalachian Mountains fade through the window as the towns got bigger and bigger until we reached the city. Cleveland swallowed me with its buildings, its busy streets, its immensity. I felt as small as an ant. Mrs. Margaret took me straight to her house in a fancy neighborhood, which I later learned was called Shaker Heights. It was a large, two-story house with a garden in the front, something I had only seen in magazines. The Wallaces. That's how Mrs. Margaret introduced me. This is the Wallace family. Dr. Arthur, her husband, was a lawyer. He spoke little, always with a stern face, glasses on the tip of his nose. Mrs. Margaret was the type of boss who inspected everything with a magnifying glass, not letting a single speck of dust escape. And then there was their son Paul, who was 22 at the time, a law student, following in his father's footsteps. The first time I saw Paul, he barely looked at me. He was on his way out, grabbing his car keys, in a hurry. He barely responded when his mother introduced me. "This is Gloria, the new maid." He just nodded and left. Better this way, I thought. They showed me where I would sleep. A tiny room in the back of the house, next to the laundry area. It had a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a small window that faced a wall. To me, it was a palace. A bed all to myself, with clean sheets, a real pillow. I came from sleeping on a mat on the floor, sharing space with 3 other siblings. This seemed like too much luxury. "You start tomorrow, 5 inches the morning," said Mrs. Margaret. "Breakfast needs to be ready by 6. I agreed to everything, grateful for the opportunity. If I had known what awaited me, I would have run back to the bus station that very moment. The first few days were about learning. I learned where everything was in the huge house, how Mrs. Margaret liked the doctor's shirts ironed, with a perfect crease, what kind of product to use on each surface, what time to serve each meal. It was hard work from Sunday to Sunday, waking up at dawn and going to sleep only after the kitchen was sparkling. But I didn't complain. Compared to life in Harlan County, this was a breeze. At least I had food every day, even if it was the leftovers of what they ate. And the best part, I would receive a salary at the end of the month. I was already imagining sending money to my mother, maybe even going back to school in my spare time, if I ever had any. The first strange thing I noticed was the isolation. In the other houses where I had worked in Harlan County, I could at least chat with the neighbors when I hung the clothes on the line, or go to the store to buy something the boss asked for. Not here. Mrs. Margaret made it clear from the first day. "You do not go out alone. If you need anything from the street, let me know and I'll have it bought." I thought it was strange, but I figured it was because I didn't know the big city, that it was dangerous. Only later did I understand it was about control. It was so I wouldn't have contact with anyone from the outside. Another thing was the telephone. When I arrived, I asked if I could call my mother to let her know I had arrived safely. "Yes, you can," said Mrs. Margaret, "but only once a month, and I'll stand right here beside you." At first, I thought it was because of the cost of the call. Long distance was expensive back then, but it was still weird. How was I going to tell my mother what my life was like there with the boss listening to every word? And why only once a month? I swallowed the urge to question it. I was in no position to make demands. You young folks now might think, why was this girl so foolish? Why didn't she talk back? But my friends, When hunger and the fear of a child in a strange land are choking you, sometimes silence is the only way to survive. I didn't have a voice back then, just an empty stomach and a young heart full of naive hope. The days went by, the weeks too, and slowly I started noticing more strange things. I never received my salary in cash. Mrs. Margaret said she was saving it for me, that I was too young to manage money. When you need to buy something, just tell me. But when I said I needed shampoo, or conditioner for my hair, or new sandals because mine had broken, she always found an excuse. Next month, or that's too expensive, it's not for your station. I was left with nothing, becoming more and more dependent on them for everything. It was the perfect trap, a prison without iron bars. They weren't just taking my money, they were slowly taking my will. When you're completely dependent on someone else for every bite of food, every personal item, you forget how to make demands. You only know how to beg. The letters I wrote to my family, with difficulty, piecing the letters together as best I could, never arrived. I would give them to Mrs. Margaret, who said she would put them in the mail. After a few months, I started to find it strange that I never got a reply. When I asked, she said my mother probably didn't have money for postage, or that the letters got lost because addresses in the countryside weren't exact. It made sense, but still, a seed of doubt was planted. Only much later did I find out that my letters never left that house. They went straight into the trash, along with the little dignity I had left. It was in the 3rd month there that I started to notice Paul's stares. At first, he barely registered my existence. He would pass by me as if I were a piece of furniture, a chair, an object. But slowly, something changed. I could feel his eyes following me when I cleaned the living room, when I served dinner. A bad shiver ran down my spine, the kind where your body senses danger before your mind understands what's happening. He started showing up in the kitchen when I was alone. He would ask silly questions, if I was enjoying Cleveland, if I had been to the beach. I always answered with my head down. Yes, sir. No, sir. Trying to finish my work quickly so I could get out of there. There was another maid who came twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning, a woman named Sarah. She was the only person I could exchange a few words with, and even then, always under Mrs. Margaret's watchful eye. One afternoon, I whispered to her about the way Paul looked at me. She made a sour face and said quietly, "Be careful, girl. The maid who was here before you left suddenly. No one really knows why." That sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to ask more, but Mrs. Margaret appeared out of nowhere, as if she had heard everything. That same day, Sarah was dismissed. "We don't need her anymore," the boss said. I never saw her again and lost the only person I felt safe with. I started locking the door to my little room at night. It didn't have a key, so I would push the old wardrobe against the door. It wouldn't do much if someone really wanted to get in, but it gave me a sense of security, even if it was false. I slept fully clothed, afraid. My sleep became light. Any noise would wake me up. I felt that something bad was about to happen, but I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I knew no one in Cleveland. I was a prisoner without chains, bound by poverty and the distance from home. One September night, Mrs. Margaret and Dr. Arthur went out for dinner. It was their wedding anniversary. They were going to spend the night out at a fancy hotel. "Paul is staying home. Have his dinner ready," the boss ordered before she left. I prepared everything, as always. I served Paul, cleaned the kitchen, and retreated to my room earlier than usual. I pushed the wardrobe against the door, as usual. I lay down fully dressed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about my family, about the life I left behind. I wondered if I had made the right choice coming to Cleveland. The noise woke me up suddenly. Someone was pushing the door hard, the wardrobe scraping against the floor. Before I could react, he was already inside. Paul, smelling of alcohol, His eyes glazed over. "Don't make a sound," was the first thing he said, closing the door behind him. I wanted to scream, but who would hear me? The house was empty, just the two of us. He was stronger, the boss's son, a man. I was just a girl from the country, with no one to stand up for me. What happened next was the first of many nightmares I lived in that house. The one place a person should feel safe is in their own room, behind a closed door. But that night, that safety was shattered, and a new, terrible chapter of abuse began. How does a young girl find the strength to even get out of bed the next morning? Stay with us as Gloria's ordeal in this house truly begins. In the morning, sore, destroyed inside and out, I cried, hugging my pillow. I thought about running away, but to where? I had no money. I didn't know the city. I had no way to get back to Harlan County. I thought about telling Mrs. Margaret when she got back, but who would believe the little maid against the doctor's son? I decided to swallow my tears and carry on. I washed the blood-stained sheet in secret. I scrubbed it so hard my fingers were raw. I pretended nothing had happened when the bosses returned, but something had died inside me that night. Some pain can't be screamed aloud. It just quietly kills a part of who you are. That morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the little girl who used to dream. All that was left was an empty shell, learning how to survive one day at a time. Paul came back other times. It was no use locking the door, pushing the wardrobe. He got in anyway, especially when his parents were out. After a while, I didn't even try to stop him anymore. I would close my eyes, travel far away in my mind, think of my homeland, of the wind rustling the leaves of the maple tree in my childhood yard. It was the only way to endure it. Every day I felt less like a person and more like a thing, an object they used and then put away in the back room. It was in November that I realized my period hadn't come. At first, I thought it was from the stress, the constant fear, the poor diet. It had been late before, but when more than a month passed, panic set in. I tried to hide the morning sickness, vomiting secretly in the small bathroom near the laundry area, away from the boss's eyes. But Mrs. Margaret had eagle eyes. It didn't take long for her to realize something was wrong. One Sunday in December, when Paul and Dr. Arthur had gone out, she cornered me in the laundry room. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" She got straight to the point, her eyes shooting daggers. I denied it, trembling. She grabbed my arm hard, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't lie to me, you tramp. It's written all over your face. Who's the father?" I broke down in tears, unable to answer. How could I say it was her son, who attacked me almost every night in my room? Was it some little boyfriend from back home? Wasn't it? You came to my house, already knocked up, and now you want to pin the responsibility on us. It was the slap across my face that made me realize she knew. Of course, she knew. Maybe she always knew what her son was doing. Maybe she even facilitated it by leaving us alone in the house so often. But in her mind, the blame was mine. Always the maid's, never the doctor's son's. "I'll take care of this," she said through clenched teeth. "I'm not going to let some little nobody destroy my son's future." At that moment, I understood that it wasn't just my freedom at risk. It was my life and the life of the baby growing inside me. In the following days, I realized something was being plotted. Whispered conversations between Mrs. Margaret and Dr. Arthur, mysterious phone calls. Paul avoiding looking at me, as if he were suddenly disgusted by what he had done so many times. I kept my ears open, trying to catch any information. It was during one of these times that I heard Mrs. Margaret on the phone. "Yes, she'll do. She's strong, healthy. She'll handle the hard work. And she has the problem I told you about. She needs to disappear as soon as possible." One January morning, Mrs. Margaret came into my room while I was still asleep. "Pack your things," she ordered. "You're going to work for Dr. Arthur's cousin in Ohio. You'll earn more there, and you'll be able to send money to your family." My heart raced. It was a way out of that hell, a chance to start over far away from them, but something in her tone didn't sound right. "Why the hurry? Why so far away in Ohio? And the baby?" I asked, afraid of the answer. "They'll take care of that there too," she replied without looking me in the eyes. "There are good doctors who solve these kinds of things. I had no choice, or at least I thought I didn't." I packed my bundle, the same few things I had brought from Harlan County, plus a few rags I had been given during those months. Mrs. Margaret handed me an envelope. "Your documents," she said, "and a letter of recommendation for Dr. Arthur's cousin." She didn't let me see the contents, just shoved it in my pocket. She put me on a Greyhound bus at the Cleveland station with a one-way ticket to Athens, Ohio, and gave me $50 for the journey. "It's enough," she said. It was a long trip that took the better part of a day, crossing unfamiliar landscapes that made me feel more isolated with every mile. The bus swayed on the roads, and my 4-month belly, already starting to show, ached with every bump. I barely ate, rationing the money, a growing certainty in my gut that something was terribly wrong. But what could I do? Go back to Cleveland with no money? Go back home to be another mouth to feed, now with a child on the way? I looked out the window as the green hills faded behind me, not knowing I was heading straight to a slaughterhouse, sold like cattle. Sitting on that bus, I was terrified, but I also held onto a tiny flicker of hope that maybe things would get better. Oh, the innocence of youth. It's both a blessing and a curse. I had no idea I was heading straight into hell, on a one-way ticket sold to me by the very people who were meant to be my protectors. When I arrived in Athens later that evening, I was dead tired. I got off at the bus station carrying my small bundle of clothes, not sure what to do. Mrs. Margaret had said someone would pick me up, that I just had to wait. I sat on a bench and waited. 1 hour, 2, the sun beginning to set. That's when a man approached, overweight, sweating, smelling of cigarettes and cheap liquor. "Are you Gloria, the girl from Kentucky?" he asked. I nodded, unable to hide my fear. "I'm Dale. I came to get you. Dr. Arthur told me about you." He led me to his car, an old, beat-up Chevy Nova with a torn interior. The smell of mildew and cigarettes inside was suffocating. We left the bus station and took a dirt road. We were heading far from the center of town. That much was clear. The houses grew sparse, the vegetation denser. After about 40 minutes, we arrived at a property surrounded by a high wall, an iron gate with a sign, the Evergreen Lodge. I didn't understand at the time what it meant. In my innocence, I thought it was the name of the farm where I was going to work. Dale honked, and the gate opened. We drove down a gravel road until we reached a large old house with peeling paint. Around it, lots of green, trees, a poorly maintained garden. We stopped, and he told me to get out. "Get your things," he ordered. When I entered the house, the shock hit me. It wasn't a farm at all. It was a brothel. I saw women in lingerie, heavy makeup, empty eyes, men drinking, smoking, hands wandering everywhere, loud music, colored lights, the smell of cheap perfume mixed with sweat and alcohol. A tall woman with bleached blonde hair and long red-painted nails came towards me. "So, this is the girl from Cleveland?" she asked Dale, looking me up and down like someone sizing up an animal at an auction. "This is her," he replied. "Pregnant, just like they told you." The woman grabbed my chin forcefully, turning my face from side to side. "Not bad. After she gives birth, she'll bring in good money. Men like these young ones with delicate features." I was trembling from head to toe, not fully understanding what was happening, but with a growing terror inside me. "Where is Dr. Arthur's cousin?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. They both burst out laughing. "Cousin? There's no cousin here, dear." What you have is Veronica, that's me, the owner of this establishment. And just like that, the floor drops out from under her world. There was no cousin, no job, no escape. She had been moved from one prison to another, this time with no pretense of a normal life. How does a person even begin to process a nightmare like this? Keep listening to learn about the grim reality of the Evergreen Lodge. It was then that I understood everything. There was no job in a family home, no cousin. I had been sold to a brothel in the middle of nowhere. I collapsed in tears, begging them to let me go. "Go where, you fool?" laughed Veronica. "You have nowhere to go, and even if you did, you owe me money." She explained to me, with the casualness of someone talking about the weather, that I had a debt with her. "Dale paid for your bus ticket, paid doctor, Arthur for your transfer, and now you will live and eat here. All of that costs money, dear. A lot of money." According to her calculations, I already owed more than $2,000 before I even started working. "But I'm only putting you to work after that baby is born," she said, pointing to my belly. "For now, you'll help with cleaning and in the kitchen." They took me to a room in the back of the house, a cubicle with several single beds crammed together, where other women slept. The floor was bare concrete, the window had bars, the bathroom was communal at the end of the hall, and it was disgusting. "This is your place," said Veronica, pushing me inside. That first night, I cried until I had no tears left. The other women there were about 12 of them living there, didn't even pay attention to the newcomers crying anymore. They were used to it, each with her own horror story, each trapped in the same snare as me. In the following days, I learned the hellish routine of the Evergreen Lodge. We woke up at 6 inches the morning. The girls, as Veronica called the women who worked in prostitution, could sleep in later, since they worked until the early hours. But the servants, like me, who took care of the cleaning and the kitchen, started early. We cleaned the whole place, the rooms where the girls received clients, the main hall with the bar and tables, the bathrooms, the kitchen. We washed bed linens, towels, lingerie, all by hand, scrubbing until our fingers were raw. Veronica was the devil in human form. Thin, tall, she must have been in her 52nds at the time, but she dressed as if she were 30. She lived in high heels, tight pants, low-cut blouses, her hair always perfectly dyed blonde. She had been a prostitute in New York in her youth. Then she became a madam and came to the countryside to open her own business. She possessed a calculated cruelty. She didn't hit on impulse. She hit to teach, to break, to crush your will. She used a broomstick that she kept behind the bar counter. My persuader, she called it. The money the girls earned went almost entirely to her. Commission, she'd say, for my services of security, lodging, and food. The little that was left, the girls spent buying things from her. Shampoo, soap, sanitary pads, medicine, all outrageously overpriced. It was a perfect system of modern slavery. The debt never decreased, it only grew. Anyone who tried to escape was made an example for the others, and there was no shortage of goons willing to hunt down runaways in exchange for free services. My belly grew every day along with my despair. The heavier I got, the harder it was to do the heavy work. But Veronica showed no mercy. Feeling delicate? Then you don't eat today. The food was already scarce and bad. Rice, watery beans, sometimes a piece of tough meat. Missing a meal meant almost fainting from weakness. I was getting thinner, despite my growing belly, my bones showing, my ribs marking my skin. But the baby seemed strong, moved a lot, kicked me as if to say, "Hang in there." The other women trapped there came from all over. There was Sophia, a woman from El Salvador who barely spoke English, brought with the promise of working as a nanny in the United States. Ashley, who left home at 15 to escape her abusive stepfather and fell into the clutches of a pimp in Columbus. Tiffany, addicted to crack, who was sold by her own drug-dealing boyfriend to pay off a debt. Hannah, who came from a wealthy family in Indiana, but ran away from home after getting pregnant and being kicked out by her parents, and ended up being lured by the promise of a job as a hotel receptionist. There were also the older ones, those who had been there for so long they no longer dreamed of freedom. Rebecca, who was over 40, with scars all over her body, the result of escape attempts and violent clients. Julie, who arrived at 17 and was now almost 30, with dead eyes, who did everything on autopilot, without complaining, without dreaming, without truly existing. These were the ones who scared me the most, seeing what I could become if I stayed there too long. The stories all resembled each other in some way. Vulnerable women, promises of a better life, a trip far from home, an unpayable debt. Some had come straight into Veronica's hands. Others had passed through other brothels before, being sold from one place to another like merchandise. The most frightening thing was knowing that this was happening all over the country, that there was an entire network of human trafficking, and that no one seemed to care. The local police turned a blind eye in exchange for courtesies. Politicians visited the place discreetly. Everyone knew what was happening there, but nobody did anything. The months went by, and my belly became huge. I was almost 9 months along when I realized the baby had changed position. It was lower, heavier. The contractions began on a hot September night. I was alone in the room. The other women were working, cleaning, or with clients. The pain came like a stabbing knife, doubling me over. I screamed, but no one came. The second contraction was worse. I dragged myself to the door, banged on it with force. "Help! The baby's coming!" The one who appeared was Rebecca, the oldest one. She helped me back to bed. "Breathe deep, girl." "It's not the first time I've helped with a birth here," she said with a calmness that frightened me. How many babies had been born in that hellhole? What happened to them afterward? I didn't have much time to think about it, because the contractions were getting stronger and closer together. Veronica appeared at the door. "Don't get the mattress too dirty. It's hard to clean." That was the only thing she said before leaving. No doctor, no hospital. Right there, in that filthy room, my son was going to be born. The labor lasted all night, a pain that is impossible to explain, as if I were being torn apart from the inside. Rebecca and 2 other women, Hannah and Julie, stayed with me, doing what they could. They heated water, brought clean cloths, supported me. "Push, girl. Push when I tell you," Rebecca instructed. She seemed to know what she was doing. She said she had been a midwife in rural Tennessee before falling into this life. Near dawn, after hours of agony, he was born. A strong, healthy cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Rebecca announced, cutting the cord with a pair of scissors she had boiled beforehand. They placed him in my arms, wrapped in an old but clean sheet. He was perfect. Fair skin, taking after his father in that respect. Black hair, lots of it. And the most incredible thing, he had the same birthmark as me on his little right arm. That little leaf-shaped mark, just like mine. It was as if nature had marked him as mine, as if no one could deny he was my son. I cried, looking at that little person who, despite being conceived in horror, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. I barely had time to admire my son. I hadn't even decided on his name yet when Veronica entered the room with 2 men I had never seen before. One of them was clearly a doctor by his white coat and briefcase. The other was younger, well-dressed, with the look of a rich person. "Let me see the baby," said the doctor, practically snatching my son from my arms. He examined him quickly, listened to his heart, checked his reflexes. "He's in perfect health," he announced to the younger man, who smiled with satisfaction. "What's happening? Give me back my son," I screamed, trying to get out of bed, but too weak after childbirth. It was Veronica who answered with a malicious smile on her thin lips. Your son is going to a home, with parents who can give him what he needs. The doctor here is from an adoption agency, and this gentleman and his wife will be the new parents. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were going to take my son, separate me from him just like that, without a second thought. You can't do this. He's my son, I screamed desperately. The doctor wrapped my baby in a better blanket they had brought and handed him to the younger man. Don't worry about the paperwork, Veronica said to him. The doctor will take care of everything. It will be registered as an abandonment, as we agreed. The man nodded, placed a thick envelope in her hands, and left, taking my son. I screamed. I thrashed. I begged. The other women held my hand, crying with me, powerless. The doctor gave me an injection in my arm. It's just a sedative, he said, but I knew it was to knock me out, so I wouldn't cause any more trouble. Before losing consciousness, I heard Veronica say, "When she wakes up, tell her the baby was stillborn. It's easier that way." The drug took effect, my vision darkened, and despair gave way to a chemical emptiness. The last thing I saw was my son leaving through the door in the arms of a stranger. Of all the cruelties Gloria had endured, this was the most monstrous. To have your child, the one beautiful thing born from so much pain, stolen from your arms moments after his birth, is a wound that may never heal. They took her son, but what would they do with her now? The story takes an even darker turn from here. Stay with us. I woke up. I don't know how many hours later, maybe the next day. My breasts were leaking milk, aching as if they would explode, but there was no baby to nurse. When I asked about my son, Rebecca looked at me with eyes full of pity. "I'm sorry, girl. He was born very weak. He didn't make it. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. I had heard his strong cry. I had seen how healthy he was. But what could I do? Who would believe me against them? I cried for days, inconsolable. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I didn't want to live. The milk dried up in my breasts, causing a fever, unbearable pain. No one cared. Veronica had them give me a pill to dry up the milk and put me to work as soon as I could stand. "Crying doesn't pay your debt," she would say. And now it's even bigger, because the birth had costs, the doctor, the medicine. 2 weeks after the birth, Veronica called me into her office, a small room in the back with an old desk and a torn faux leather chair. "You're ready to start working for real," she announced. I understood immediately what she meant. Now that I was no longer pregnant, they were going to put me into prostitution. I shook my head desperately. "I can't. Please, let me continue cleaning. In the kitchen. Anything but this." The slap was hard, splitting my lip, the warm blood running down my chin. "You still don't get it, you idiot. You don't have a choice. You either work or you die. Simple as that." That night, they took me to the room where the girls received clients. They gave me a see-through red nightgown, applied heavy makeup to my face, and dabbed sweet, nauseating perfume on my neck. "She's a new one," Veronica announced to the men in the hall. "Just gave birth. Her body still warm from a woman who just had a child." I won't describe what happened that night, nor in the thousands of nights that followed. There are things you bury deep in your memory to be able to go on living. What I can say is that I died a little each day. Each man who entered that room took a piece of my soul with him. At first I cried, begged, resisted. After a while, I learned to leave my body. I would stare at the ceiling, thinking of my homeland, my mother, my son who had been stolen. I imagined what he would be like, if he was being well treated, if he would one day know that a mother existed who had not abandoned him by choice. Time in captivity is different. A day feels like a year, but the years fly by in the blink of an eye. You get used to things you thought were impossible to endure. Your body grows calluses, and so does your soul. It's like you split in two, the one who suffers and the one who watches the suffering from a distance, anesthetized. That's how I lived, on autopilot, working, sleeping, eating the bare minimum, praying for a miracle that never came. Can you believe that there are women going through this even today, in the 21st century? Do you think you would report it if you knew of a place like that, or would you be afraid to get involved? Tell me what you would do, because back then, no one wanted to get involved with my despair. The neighbors of the property knew what happened there. The taxi drivers who brought clients knew. The merchants who sold liquor and cigarettes to the brothel knew. The police knew. Everyone knew, and no one did anything. It was as if we didn't exist as people, as if we were just trash that no one bothered to pick up. I tried to escape once, after almost 2 years of being trapped there. There was a truck driver client who seemed to feel sorry for me. He always asked only for me, paid well, sometimes didn't even want anything, just to talk. I was beginning to think he could help me. One night, I gathered my courage and asked him, "Get me out of here. Take me on your next trip. I'll hide in the truck." He seemed to consider it, said he would think about it. The following week when he returned, he agreed. He said he would help me, that I just had to wait for his signal. On the agreed day, when he gave the signal, I managed to escape through the bathroom window. It was small, but I was so thin that I squeezed through. I ran to the spot where he had said he would wait for me with the truck, behind the property. My heart was nearly pounding out of my chest. The adrenaline. When I got there, it wasn't him waiting for me. It was Dale, Veronica's goon, with 2 other men. "Your truck driver friend got a month of free beer and free girls for turning you in," he said, laughing in my face. "Did you really think someone would risk their neck for A?" The beating I took after that almost killed me. Dale and the other 2 beat me right there in the middle of the woods. Kicks, punches, slaps. I felt ribs break. My nose burst. Blood everywhere. At some point, one of them hit me hard in the left ear. I heard a pop, then nothing more from that side. That's how I lost part of my hearing. When they were done, they dragged me back to the brothel, practically unconscious. They threw me in the middle of the main room, in front of the other girls and the clients, as an example. "Look what happens to those who try to escape," Veronica announced, pointing at me, bloodied and semi-conscious on the floor. She grabbed the persuader, the broomstick she used to beat the girls, and gave me a few more whacks on my legs. "Next time, I'll break both your legs, so you'll never think of running again," she promised. That glimmer of hope, the one thing that keeps a person going, was not just extinguished, it was brutally punished. This wasn't just a beating to the body, it was an attack on her very will to survive. After this, would Gloria ever dare to hope again? Let's find out. The other women looked on in horror, some crying silently. The clients kept drinking. Some even laughed, as if it were an entertaining show. I spent weeks recovering from that beating. No one called a doctor, of course. It was the girls themselves who took care of me as best they could. Rebecca, who knew a little about broken bones, tried to set my ribs. Hannah, who had worked in a pharmacy before, managed to steal painkillers from a client. I survived out of sheer stubbornness. The hearing in my left ear never fully returned. To this day, I only hear a ringing on that side, as if there's a swarm of bees trapped in my head. After that attempt, I never tried to escape again. I lost hope. I accepted that this was my destiny, that I would die there, that I would never see my family again, never know what happened to my son. The days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. I lost track of time. The only way to know the years were passing was by looking at my own body in the cracked mirror of the bathroom. The first wrinkles appearing, my hair losing its shine, my once smooth skin becoming marked. The women came and went. Some died of illness, from beatings, from overdoses of the drugs they took to endure life. Some were sold to another brothel, when Veronica got tired of them or received a good offer. Others simply disappeared from one day to the next, without explanation. No one asked too many questions. It was better not to know. New ones arrived to replace those who left. Girls who were younger and younger, some barely out of childhood. It was heartbreaking. I tried to protect the new girls as best I could, teaching them the tricks to suffer less, to survive in that hell. Don't look them in the eye, I'd say. Don't show fear or disgust, or it will be worse. Think of good things while it's happening. Travel far away in your head. The men who frequented the place were of all types. There was the farmhand who came to spend his month's wages on a night of drinking and girls. There was a businessman from the city who arrived in an imported car and demanded total discretion. There were politicians on the campaign trail, priests with their collars hidden in the trunk, family men who told their wives they were going fishing with friends. There were the violent ones who liked to hit, to hurt. Those were the worst. Veronica charged more for special services, as she called it. You can hit, but don't mark the face or break anything. That was the only rule. Time passed, and I grew old in that prison. When you're young, you have more value in this rotten world. The older I got, the fewer clients sought me out, the less money I brought in. The more Veronica complained that I was a loss. I'm going to have to send you somewhere else where they like older women, she would threaten. In truth, I no longer cared. One hell or another, what difference did it make? 18 years. For 18 years, I served men I hated while I cried for a son I believed was dead. Until one rainy Thursday, the police raided the Evergreen Lodge. And I learned that sometimes freedom arrives when you've already given up on it. The raid happened so suddenly that no one had time to react. It was raining hard that Thursday, a storm so bad it made the lights flicker. It was around 11 at night. The brothel was just starting to fill up. Veronica was nervous because an important politician had arranged to come, a state representative who always visited when he was campaigning. She had even ordered expensive champagne, something she never did. Suddenly, we heard the sound of cars, many cars arriving at once. I thought it was the representative and his entourage, but what came next were shouts. FBI! Everybody stay down! Nobody move! The front door was kicked in with a bang that seemed to shake the whole house. Men in bulletproof vests, guns drawn, swarming everywhere. The girls running to their rooms, clients trying to hide, and Veronica screaming like a madwoman, her goons pulling out their guns. I was at the bar serving drinks when one of the agents pulled me to the floor. Stay down, he ordered. I obeyed, trembling from head to toe. I heard gunshots, breaking glass, more screams. It was all very fast and confusing. I later found out that one of Veronica's goons had reacted, shot at an agent, and was shot in return. The others surrendered immediately. I saw them handcuffing Veronica, who was kicking and cursing everyone. I have protection. You don't know who you're messing with, she yelled as they dragged her outside. An agent came towards me, a woman in uniform, with a serious but not aggressive face. Ma'am, are you an employee? She asked. I didn't know what to answer. Was I an employee? Was I a slave? What was I, after all? I've been held here for 18 years, I managed to say, my voice barely coming out. They brought me from Kentucky with the promise of a job, but they never let me leave. She exchanged a look with another agent, then turned her attention back to me. Come with me, she said, more gently now. We were taken to a sports gymnasium in the city. There were about 20 women rescued from the brothel, of various ages. The youngest was about 15. Poor thing. The oldest was me, at 35. There were social workers, doctors, psychologists, everyone asking questions, taking pictures, collecting testimonies. It felt like a strange, surreal dream. After being imprisoned for so long, to be treated like a human being, to be heard, was something I couldn't quite process. One of the social workers, a woman named Laura, sat next to me. "You're free now," she said in a calm voice. Freedom. After 18 years, the word itself must have sounded foreign, almost unbelievable. But what does freedom mean when you have nothing, know no one, and have forgotten how to live in the outside world? Gloria's rescue was not the end of her struggle. It was the beginning of a brand new one. Keep listening to see how she learns to be a person again. I just stared at her, not quite understanding the meaning of those words. Free? What was that after 18 years of captivity? How does one live being free? Where does one go? What does one do? She must have sensed my confusion, because she continued, "I know it seems scary now, but we're going to help. There's a shelter for women in situations of violence where you can stay for now." But scary wasn't the right word. It was paralyzing. For 18 years, every minute of my day had been dictated by someone else. When to wake, what to clean, who to serve, what to eat. Now, in the shelter, they would ask me simple questions that felt like impossible tests. "Do you want orange juice or apple juice for breakfast?" I would stand there, frozen, a panic rising in my chest. A choice. I had forgotten how to make one. The freedom everyone spoke of felt like a vast, terrifying ocean, and I was a woman who had forgotten how to swim. The smallest decision felt like it could lead to punishment. A habit of fear so deeply ingrained that my mind couldn't accept it was truly over. In the following days, I learned that the police operation hadn't been for our sake. The police were investigating a money laundering and corruption scheme involving politicians. The representative who was supposed to visit the brothel that night was the main target. Veronica and the brothel were just part of the scheme. The place served as a meeting point for deals, bribes, and settling scores. We, the women, were just decoration, accessories, but we ended up being rescued as a byproduct. It's ironic, isn't it? For 18 years, we were like ghosts unseen, unheard. Then freedom arrived, not because our cries for help were answered, but simply because we were accidentally caught in the crossfire of powerful men. Sometimes, justice in this world is just a stroke of luck like that, folks. I was taken to the shelter in Columbus, the capital of Ohio, about 3 hours from Athens. It was a large old house run by an NGO. It had shared rooms, but they were much better than the brothel. Clean beds, individual lockers with keys, a decent bathroom. There were other women there, all fleeing some form of violence. Most were cases of domestic violence, women escaping abusive husbands. Some had their young children with them. I was the only one rescued from forced prostitution, at least at that moment. The first few days consisted of medical exams, giving statements to the police, and talking with social workers. I found out I had severe anemia, kidney problems, rotten teeth, and a chronic gynecological infection that had never been treated. I started taking medication, undergoing treatment, slowly regaining my health. But my mind was in a much worse state than my body. I had nightmares every night. I would wake up screaming, frightening the other women in the room. Any loud noise made me tremble. I couldn't look men in the eye, not even the doctors or police officers who only wanted to help. The hardest thing of all was making decisions. After 18 years of having everything decided for me, what time to wake up, what time to eat, what clothes to wear, who to sleep with, I suddenly had to choose basic things: what to eat for breakfast, what activity to do during the day, what clothes to wear. It seemed trivial, but each choice was a mountain to climb. I would freeze, paralyzed by simple things. "Do you want orange juice or apple juice?" they would ask. And I would stand there in a panic, not knowing what to answer, afraid of giving the wrong answer and being punished. You see, when someone takes away your every choice for nearly 20 years, freedom doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a terrifying weight. A simple question like orange juice or apple juice was enough to fill me with panic, because in my world, a wrong choice could be paid for with a beating. It took a long, long time to learn how to be a person again. At the shelter, there were various activities during the day: craft classes, cooking classes, sewing classes, all to help the women gain some skill that could become a livelihood later on. There was also psychological support, both in groups and individually. At first, I barely spoke, staying in a corner, quiet, observing everything with suspicion. Years of abuse teach a person to hide, to become small, invisible. It was my defense mechanism. It was there that I met Alice, a volunteer who taught literacy classes at the shelter. She must have been in her 60s, with white hair tied in a bun, thick-rimmed glasses, the air of an old-fashioned teacher. "Can you read?" she asked me one day, seeing me looking at a poster on the wall without really understanding it. I shook my head. Just a little. I studied until the 3rd grade back in Kentucky, but it's been so long, I've forgotten almost everything. She smiled, a sweet, non-judgmental smile. Want to learn again? It's never too late. And so I started having classes with Alice 3 times a week. She was incredibly patient. She didn't mind repeating the same thing over and over, starting from the beginning when I got stuck, encouraging me when I wanted to give up. "Every letter you learn is a door that opens," she would say. Slowly, I began to relearn how to put letters together, to form words, then whole sentences. The first time I managed to read a paragraph from a book on my own, I cried so much I soaked the page. It was like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been stolen. 6 months passed at the shelter. My body was better with the constant medical treatment. My mind, well, that would take longer to heal, if it ever healed completely. But I was alive, free, and relearning how to exist in the world. The problem was, I couldn't stay at the shelter forever. The maximum stay was 1 year, and even then, only in very special cases. I needed to find a place to live, a job, to move on. I tried to locate my family in Kentucky, but without success. After so much time, the address had changed. The phone number no longer existed. No one had any information. The social worker suggested I try to start over right there in Columbus, where I was already adapting and had the support of the assistance network. "If you ever locate your family, you can go back to Kentucky," she said. "But for now, it might be better to build a foundation here." I started looking for a job, but it wasn't easy. What do you put on a resume after 18 years of forced prostitution? What experience did I have? What references could I give? Besides, there was the issue of age. 35 might not seem old, but for someone looking for a cleaning lady or a store clerk, a 3-5-year-old woman with no experience and no education is already considered old. I lost count of how many doors were closed in my face. It was Alice, my literacy teacher, who gave me my first opportunity. Her brother, Mr. Walter, owned a small hotel in downtown Columbus. Nothing fancy. A second-rate hotel that mainly received business travelers, farmers from the countryside who came to the capital to shop, and truck drivers. "He needs someone for cleaning," she told me. "I told him about you. It's not much, but it's a start." I went for the interview with Mr. Walter with my heart in my throat, terrified. He was a man of about 65, short, chubby, bald, with a big gray mustache. He had a stern face, but his eyes were kind. He listened to my summarized story. Alice had already told him the basics, and he didn't ask many questions. "My name is Mr. Walter," he said, "and Alice trusts you. That's reference enough for me. You can start on Monday. Minimum wage on the books, 6 hours a day, Sundays off." My first real job with a contract seemed like a dream. The work itself wasn't much different from what I did at the brothel. Cleaning rooms, changing sheets, washing bathrooms. But the fundamental difference was that it was by choice. It was dignified. It was paid fairly. No one yelled at me if I took a little longer in a room. No one threatened me if I broke something by accident. No one treated me like trash. It was just a normal job, like anyone else does. Mr. Walter was a fair boss. He wasn't one for much conversation, but he respected everyone, from the housekeeper to the receptionist. He paid on time, gave a grocery basket at the end of the month, sometimes even a bonus when the hotel was full. Most importantly, he treated me like a person. After so long being treated as an object, as merchandise, this was more valuable than any salary. With my first month's salary, I managed to rent a small room in a boarding house. It was tiny, barely fitting a single bed and a small wardrobe. The bathroom was communal at the end of the hall, shared with 5 other tenants. The kitchen was also communal, a small 2-burner stove where everyone cooked their own food, but it was mine. My space, my key, my door that I could lock from the inside without anyone forcing their way in. For the first time in 18 years, I slept through the night without fear. It's amazing how something as simple as a key to your own door can feel like the greatest treasure on earth. This small room was more than just a place to sleep. It was the first piece of her life that she truly owned. And it was here, in this newfound safety, that a hidden talent was about to emerge. I started saving money, little by little. I spent almost nothing beyond rent and food. I bought some basic clothes, toiletries, a battery-powered radio to listen to music and news. I saved the rest, every single cent. I didn't know exactly what for. I just knew I needed to have a reserve, a safety net, something that would guarantee I would never again have to depend on anyone to survive. At the hotel, besides cleaning, I sometimes helped in the kitchen when things got busy. There was a cook, Betty, who made breakfast for the guests. Bread, muffins, coffee, milk, fruit, the basics. When there were a lot of guests, I would lend a hand, washing dishes, cutting fruit, setting the breakfast table. That's how I ended up discovering I had a knack for it. One day, Betty woke up sick, with a bad flu and a high fever, and couldn't come to work. Mr. Walter was desperate because the hotel was fully booked. A group of businessmen from Chicago was staying there. Now what? Who's going to make breakfast? He asked, pacing back and forth. I can try, I offered timidly. He looked at me suspiciously. You know how to cook? I shrugged. I know the basics. In Kentucky, I helped my mother, and here at the hotel, I've watched how Betty does it. He didn't have much choice, so he agreed. I went into the kitchen at 5 inches the morning, nervous but determined. I did what I knew. Strong coffee, like I learned from my mother back in Kentucky. Boiled milk with a pinch of cinnamon. I cut fruit cantaloupe, bananas, watermelon. I made a simple cornbread from a recipe I remembered by heart. And finally, I risked making something from my homeland. Biscuits with sausage gravy. It was simple, cheap, but I knew it was delicious. Breakfast was a success. The guests praised it, especially the biscuits and gravy. This is Southern food, isn't it? One of the businessmen from Chicago asked. Yes, sir, I replied proudly. From Kentucky. My mother's recipe. He smiled. It's delicious, different from anything I've ever had in a hotel. Congratulations. It was the first time, in a long time, that someone had praised me for something I had made. I felt a warmth in my chest, a pride I didn't know I could still feel. Mr. Walter noticed the success and came to talk to me after the guests had left. I didn't know you could cook so well, he commented. That was the best breakfast we've served in years. I thanked him shyly. I know how to make other things too, I mentioned. Back in Kentucky, we make a lot of fried chicken, collard greens, shrimp, and grits. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. The hotel doesn't have a restaurant, just breakfast, but I've been thinking about offering some light meals at night for guests who don't want to go out. Maybe you could help with that. and so began a change in my life. I continued cleaning in the morning, but in the afternoon, I started working in the kitchen. At first, it was just a simple snack offered to guests. Potato soup, chili, cornbread with butter, simple things. But the guests liked it, praised it, came back for more, especially those from outside Ohio, who found it interesting to try Southern food there in the Midwest. Mr. Walter started to invest more in the idea. He bought better equipment for the kitchen, expanded the menu, and even put a few small tables in the reception area to serve the snacks. He gave me a raise and changed my job title on my records to kitchen assistant. I couldn't believe my luck. I was doing something I enjoyed, being recognized for it, and earning better money. It seemed like the wheel of life had finally turned in my favor. With the better salary, I was able to rent a slightly larger place, a small room with its own bathroom. It was tiny, but it was all mine. I also started sending letters to Kentucky, trying to locate my family. I even hired a private detective with the savings I had accumulated to try to find my mother and my siblings. I wanted to know if they were alive, if they were well, to tell them that I had survived. But it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. So much time had passed. So many things had changed. It was around this time that I got the idea to sell Southern food on the street on weekends. I saw a report on TV about a market that took place every Sunday in a park in Columbus, where artisans, small merchants, and food vendors set up stalls. I thought, why can't I make fried chicken, biscuits, pecan pie, food from my homeland? I mentioned the idea to Mr. Walter, afraid he wouldn't like it, but to my surprise, he supported it. Great idea. You can even use leftover ingredients from the hotel kitchen. Just bring me some fried chicken every now and then, he joked. I started small, with a folding table and a gas burner. I fried the chicken on the spot, served it with biscuits and gravy that I prepared at home the night before. I also made pecan pie and banana pudding, which I sold by the slice, wrapped in paper. On the first Sunday, I sold out in a few hours. The second, I brought double, and it sold out too. By the third Sunday, I had customers waiting for me when I arrived at the park. Southern food was a hit there in Columbus because it was different, exotic to the local palate. The people of Ohio have their own cuisine, the famous Cincinnati chili, pierogies, but the flavor of the South, with its rich gravies, savory greens, and sweet desserts, was a novelty, and a pleasant one at that. Soon my little stall at the Sunday market became a must-stop. With the extra money from the market, I was able to invest in better equipment. I bought a pop-up tent, a gas stove with 2 burners, good pots, and utensils. I expanded the menu to include shrimp and grits, which I served in small bowls, and pulled pork sandwiches. The success was so great that I started selling on Saturdays as well, at another, smaller market. Of course, not everything was easy in this new beginning. There were days I woke up with my body aching so much I could barely get out of bed, a consequence of the beatings, the forced labor, the years of neglecting my health. There were nights I couldn't sleep. I was haunted by nightmares where Veronica would come to get me, where I was back at the Evergreen Lodge, where men were chasing me. I would wake up screaming, in a cold sweat, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. And trust? That was a luxury item for me. I couldn't trust anyone completely, not even Mr. Walter, who had only helped me. I always thought there was some hidden interest, some trap, some plan to exploit me when I let my guard down. When a man got too close at the market, even just to buy food, I would freeze. My breathing would become difficult. Sometimes I would drop things. The psychologist from the project that supported women victims of violence, I continued going to counseling even after leaving the shelter, said this was normal. Trauma doesn't heal overnight, she would explain. Your body, your mind, they learn to react this way to protect you. It will take time to feel safe again. She taught me breathing techniques to control panic attacks, exercises to do when the fear was strong, ways to distinguish real danger from traumatic memory. Despite the difficulties, each month that passed, I was better than the last. Each small victory a day without a nightmare, being able to make change without my hands shaking, talking to a customer without looking away, was celebrated as a great achievement. And it was. Those who have never had their soul broken don't understand how difficult it is to glue the pieces back together and keep on living. The Sunday market was where I began to rebuild my ability to live in society. There, among the other vendors, I learned to talk again, to smile, to be part of a community. There was Mrs. Irene, who sold handmade crafts at the stall next to mine, an elderly lady who always saved a cup of water for me on hot days. There was Mr. Jerry from the donut stand, who taught me the tricks of the market, the best time to arrive, how to negotiate prices with suppliers, how to deal with inspectors. There was Mariana, a young woman who sold clothes, who helped me set up and take down my stall when my arms ached too much. Little by little, I formed a support network, a circle of friends, something I hadn't had for so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like. They weren't blood family, but they were people who cared, who asked if I was okay when I missed a Sunday, who offered me a ride when it rained, who shared their secrets of survival with me. It was little for someone with a normal life, but for me, who came from absolute nothingness, it was a treasure. 3 years passed like this, working at the hotel during the week, at the markets on the weekend, saving money, rebuilding my life bit by bit. I continued to search for my family, but without success. The detective I hired managed to find out that my mother had passed away years ago, that some of my brothers had moved to Chicago, others to New York, but with no exact addresses. It was as if my history had been erased, as if that girl from Harlan County no longer existed. And my son. That was the thought that never left me in peace. Where would he be? What would he be like? Had he been well treated by the family that bought him? Would he know he was adopted? Would he have any memory, any intuition about his true origin? I was in my early 42nds. So he must have been around 25 or 26, a young man already. Sometimes, when I saw young men that age on the street, I would stare, looking for features that might resemble mine or, well, his father's. It was foolish, I knew. In a big city, the chance of bumping into him by chance was practically zero. But hope is the last thing to die, right? It was around this time that I made an important decision. I was going to open my own business. After working at the market for so long, I had saved a little money, not a lot, but enough for a down payment on the rent for a small commercial spot. It was a tiny space, just a single storefront, in an alley near downtown Columbus. It wasn't the best address in the city, far from it, but the rent fit my budget, and a lot of people passed by there during the day. I talked to Mr. Walter, who once again surprised me with his support. "It's about time," he said. "You have talent, you deserve your own place." He not only encouraged me, but also helped me with the business plan. He taught me how to do basic accounting of income and expenses. He even lent me some old tables and chairs that he no longer used at the hotel. "You can pay me back when the business is up and running," he insisted when I tried to refuse. And so, the Bluegrass Kitchen was born, my small southern food restaurant in the middle of Columbus. In the beginning, it was just me doing everything. Cooking, serving, washing dishes, cleaning. The menu was small: fried chicken, biscuits, shrimp and grits, pulled pork, collard greens, and a few typical desserts like pecan pie and banana pudding. I only opened for lunch and early afternoon because I didn't feel safe working at night, with the memory of the brothel still so vivid. The first few months were tough. There were days when hardly any customers showed up. There were days when I had leftover food that I had to take home and eat for 3 days straight. There were days when the old second-hand refrigerator I bought broke down and I lost ingredients. But I persisted, adapted, and learned from my mistakes. Mr. Walter started directing guests from the hotel to my restaurant, which helped a lot. The customers from the Sunday market began to show up during the week. Word of mouth did its slow but effective work. After a year, business had improved so much that I needed to hire help. I remembered the shelter where I had stayed when I was rescued and went there. I spoke with the social worker, explaining that I wanted to give an opportunity to a woman who, like me, was starting her life over after a difficult situation. That's how I met Megan, a young woman in her 22nd who had fled her violent husband with a young daughter. She knew nothing about Southern cooking, but she was eager to learn and desperately needed the job. I hired her on the spot. Megan was the first of several women who worked at my small restaurant over the years. Some stayed for a short time, moving on to better things. Others stayed longer, becoming almost like family. I made a point of always hiring women in vulnerable situations. Ex-convicts, single mothers, victims of violence, homeless women. People who, like me, needed a chance, someone to believe in them when no one else did. The Bluegrass Kitchen never made me rich. It never became a big chain. It never appeared in food magazines. But it became a well-known spot in Columbus, a little place where you could eat well for a fair price with warm service. The simple tables, the improvised decor with pictures and crafts that customers brought as gifts, the ceiling fan that spun lazily on hot days, all of this became part of the place's charm. And most importantly, it became my place in the world. The place where I was in charge, where I made the decisions, where no one could force me to do anything against my will. The place I built with my own hands, my sweat, my determination. After a life of being someone else's property, having something that was mine alone, that no one could take from me, was the greatest wealth I could imagine. This is the heart of it all, isn't it? The Bluegrass Kitchen wasn't just a business, it was a declaration of freedom. Every plate of food she served was a testament to her survival, and every woman she hired was a reflection of the chance she herself was given. Gloria had finally built a life of peace and purpose, completely unaware that her past was about to walk right through her door. Little by little, my fried chicken stall became a meeting point in the Central Park. People came for the taste of the food, but they returned for the conversation. I never talked about my past, but maybe they sensed that here was a woman who knew pain deeper than most. What I didn't know was that while I was serving my customers, one of them had been looking for me for years. Time went on, and before I knew it, I had turned 60. 25 years in Columbus, more time than I had spent anywhere else. The Bluegrass Kitchen had become a local institution. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, but everyone knew it. Politicians, businessmen, housewives, students, workers, people of all kinds sat at the same simple tables to eat my fried chicken and shrimp and grits. I had adapted some recipes to the Midwestern palate, adding a local touch to dishes that originally didn't have it, inventing fusions that made purists turn up their noses, but pleased the local crowd. It was my small way of mixing my two lives, the Kentuckian I was born as, and the Ohioan I had become. Over the years, I hired more people, expanded the space by renting the shop next door, and even bought a food truck to go back to selling at the Sunday market. Now, it wasn't me myself, as my joints ached too much to stand for hours frying chicken, but employees trained by me, following my recipes to the letter. I had become a small business owner, something I had never imagined back when I was just a scared girl, fleeing hunger in Harlan County. I still lived alone, in a modest but comfortable apartment that I managed to buy after many years of saving. 2 small bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, 1 bathroom, a luxury for someone who had slept on dirt floors and in brothel cots. I had a quiet, even routine life. I would wake up early, go to the restaurant, supervise everything, and come home in the late afternoon. On Sundays, I would visit the food truck at the market. Then I would go to church. Not that I was very religious, but I liked the sense of community, of belonging to something bigger than myself. I never had another man in my life, nor did I want one. After everything I had been through, the idea of intimacy, of letting someone get that close, gave me the creeps. I had a few admirers over the years. Mr. Walter himself, after he became a widower, dropped a few hints, but I pretended not to understand. I was happy alone. I had friends. I had the girls who worked with me, who were almost like daughters. I didn't miss a husband or romance. I missed family. That's what I missed. My siblings I had never seen again. And most of all, always, every single day of my life, I missed the son who was taken from me, who didn't even get a name, who I couldn't even properly nurse. It was on an ordinary Wednesday, one of those with average business at the restaurant, that he first appeared. A man. He must have been in his early 42nds, well-dressed, with the air of an educated person. He sat alone, ordered the shrimp and grits, ate everything, complimented it, and left a generous tip. Nothing that drew attention. He was just another customer, I thought. But he came back the next day, and the day after that. Always alone, always ordering different dishes, always observing everything with attention. On the third day, I offered him a slice of pecan pie on the house and brought it to him myself, curious about this particular young man. "Are you new in town?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. He smiled, a nice smile, with well-cared-for teeth. "No, ma'am, I'm from here, but I'd never been to this restaurant before. A shame, the food is wonderful." I thanked him for the compliment. "And what do you do for a living?" I continued, not sure why I was so interested in this specific customer. "I'm a lawyer," he replied. "I work mainly in civil law." I felt impressed. "An educated man. Your mother must be very proud." Something changed in his eyes when I mentioned the word mother. A different glint, a tension. "Are you from around here too?" he asked, changing the subject. I shook my head. "No, I'm from Kentucky, a small town in the mountains. I ended up here as an adult, by a twist of fate." He seemed genuinely interested. "And you came straight from Kentucky to here?" The question made me uncomfortable. Memories I preferred not to stir, more or less. It's a long, complicated story, not worth telling. I gave a forced smile and went back to work with a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. He continued to come back every day for 2 weeks. Sometimes he had lunch, sometimes just a coffee in the late afternoon. He started asking more questions. How long I had been in Columbus, if I had family in Kentucky, if I had children. Always polite, never invasive, but persistent. The girls who worked with me started to notice. "Grandma Gloria, that lawyer is interested in you," they teased. I would laugh and give them a light tap on the arm. "Stop that foolishness, girls. I'm old enough to be his grandmother." But deep down, I was curious too. Why all the interest? It was in the 3rd week that he arrived with a briefcase. He asked to speak with me privately. I took him to the small room in the back that I used as an office. A small desk, an old computer I barely knew how to use, piles of invoices and bills to pay. "Gloria Henderson," he began, using my full name, which I found strange. "I don't know how to say this, so I'll be direct. My name is Nathan Carter. I am a lawyer, yes, but I'm also adopted. And I believe that you are my biological mother." The world stopped. I swear it stopped. It was as if time froze, as if everything around me was suspended. My heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The shape of his face, the way he furrowed his brow, something in his eyes. It could be, but no. It couldn't be that easy, such a coincidence. After so much time, so much suffering, to find my son just like that, out of the blue, Life isn't that generous." "You must be mistaken, sir," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I had a son, yes, a long time ago, but they told me he died shortly after he was born." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't die, Gloria. I was sold. Sold like merchandise. And I've spent the last 8 years of my life looking for the woman who gave birth to me." He opened his briefcase and took out some documents. A birth certificate, a fake one with another mother's name, adoption papers, a photo of him as a baby, a photo of him as a child. "I have no way to prove it with absolute certainty, not without a DNA test," he continued, "but I have this." He rolled up the sleeve of his dress shirt and showed me his right forearm. There it was, identical to mine. The birthmark in the shape of a leaf. My eyes filled with tears. My trembling hand touched his mark, then my own. The same. Identical. My son. That was all I could say before I collapsed into a cry that had been held back for 43 years. This is the moment a lifetime of pain and longing comes pouring out. A miracle she never dared to pray for had just walked into her restaurant, the past and present colliding in a single tearful embrace. But finding each other is one thing. Building a relationship after 35 years apart is another journey entirely. Let's see how they begin to piece their family back together. In that very moment, time seemed to stand still. 35 years of pain, of grief, and of buried hope. It all came flooding out in a single second. It wasn't just tears. It was an entire stolen lifetime suddenly being handed back to me. A miracle I never ever dared to dream of. He cried too. A grown man, a trained lawyer, crying like a child. We hugged right there in the cramped little room in the back of the restaurant. A hug that tried to reclaim 35 years of separation, of pain, of a longing I didn't even know I could have for someone I barely knew. When we finally managed to calm down a bit, we sat down, and he began to tell his story. He had been adopted by a middle-class couple from Columbus. His father, an accountant, his mother, a university professor. Good, decent people who raised him with love, education, and values. They never hid that he was adopted, always spoke openly about it. "They are my real parents in every sense that matters," he made sure to clarify. "They gave me everything they could. Love, education, support. I will never stop loving and respecting them for that." But even so, he had always felt a curiosity about his biological origin. When he turned 18, his adoptive parents gave him the folder with his adoption documents. That's when he began to realize that something was strange. The original birth certificate had been clearly forged. It had a mother's name that didn't exist, a hospital that didn't check out, information that made no sense. The story they told my parents was that I had been abandoned by a teenage mother who couldn't afford to raise me, he explained. They paid an adoption processing fee that I now know was actually the purchase price. When he started law school, he began to research more deeply. He discovered that there was a baby trafficking scheme in Ohio in the 82nds and 92nds. Children taken from vulnerable mothers, many in situations of forced prostitution, and sold to middle-class families who couldn't adopt through legal channels. A lucrative, cruel business that was practically impossible to trace decades later. After graduating, he began to search more seriously. He used his contacts in the police, the judiciary, and public records offices. He went after information about the doctor who had signed his fake birth certificate, who had been dead for years. He investigated the adoption clinic, which was long closed. Little by little, piece by piece, he managed to put together a rough picture of what had happened. I found out that I came from a brothel in Athens called the Evergreen Lodge, that I was sold by a madam named Veronica to intermediaries who then sold me to my parents. My eyes widened when I heard the name of the brothel and the madam. It was real. It was true. It was him, my son. "How did you find me?" I asked, still not fully believing that this was happening. He smiled, wiping away a tear. "It wasn't easy. I managed to locate a few women who worked at the Evergreen Lodge around the same time. Most didn't want to talk, still afraid, still traumatized. But one of them, who now lives in Indiana, remembered a young woman from Kentucky who had a baby there and then disappeared during a police raid. Her name was Rebecca, the same woman who had helped me with the birth, who had seen them take my son away. She gave me what little she knew, that you were from Kentucky, that you had a birthmark just like mine, that you were between 35 and 40 years old at the time. She didn't know your real name because at the brothel, you all used fake names. They called you Kentucky. That hit me hard. That's what they called me, as I was the only one from Kentucky among the women. How did you get from Rebecca to me? I asked, still trying to understand how this miracle had happened. Nathan explained that he had searched in Columbus for any Southern food establishment, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I had stayed in the region and used my roots to make a living. It was a shot in the dark, he admitted. I visited every Southern food restaurant within a 100-mile radius. When I got here, I saw you with the birthmark in the same place as mine. I wasn't sure, but I felt something. I decided to come for several days, to observe, to ask subtle questions to be sure before revealing myself. We spent hours talking in that small room. I told him everything. My childhood in Harlan County, the job at the Wallace House, the abuse from their son, the pregnancy, being sold to the brothel, his birth, the years of forced prostitution, the rescue, rebuilding my life in Columbus. He listened intently, sometimes crying, sometimes holding my hand tightly, as if he were afraid I would disappear again. I also told him about the various attempts I had made over the years to find information about him, always without success. I never gave up on you, I said, looking into his eyes. I only stopped actively searching because I really thought you had died. But not a day went by that I didn't think of you, that I didn't wonder what you would be like, where you would be. He told me more about his life, his happy childhood with his adoptive parents, school, college, his recent marriage to a doctor named Emily. "We don't have children yet," he said, "but we want them. You're going to be a grandmother, Gloria. A grandmother." The word caught me off guard. I had never thought about it. I had accepted that I would die alone, without descendants. And now, suddenly, I not only had a grown, educated, successful son, but also the prospect of grandchildren in the future. When we finally left that room, it was already night. The restaurant was closed, the employees had gone home, leaving a worried note asking if everything was okay. Okay? It was more than okay. It was perfect. A 35-year hole in my soul had suddenly been filled. I arranged to meet Nathan the next day for lunch at his house. To meet his wife, his parents, his life. When we said goodbye at the restaurant door, he hugged me tightly again. "See you tomorrow, Mom," he said. Mom, the most beautiful word in the world. I didn't sleep that night. I kept tossing and turning in bed, replaying everything that had happened, afraid I would wake up and find it was all just a dream. In the morning, I got ready with a care I hadn't taken in years. I put on my best dress, applied lipstick, fixed my hair. I felt like a teenager going on a first date. I took a taxi to the address Nathan had given me, a middle-class subdivision in the southern part of Columbus, far from the downtown area where my restaurant was. His house was beautiful, simple but well-kept. I was greeted by his wife Emily, a young, smiling woman who hugged me as if she had known me for years. His parents, my competitors in motherhood, as I had feared, turned out to be wonderful people. Mr. Howard and Mrs. Joyce welcomed me with open arms, without jealousy, without suspicion. "He always wanted to find you," said Mrs. Joyce, holding my hand. "We never hid anything from him. We always supported his search. You are part of the family now." At that lunch, sitting at a table with people who until the day before were complete strangers. I felt, for the first time in decades, the warmth of a real family. They treated me with respect, with affection, with genuine interest. They wanted to know about me, my life, my restaurant. Mr. Howard even joked, "Now I understand why Nathan is so stubborn. He gets it from his mother." And everyone laughed, without malice, without resentment. In the following months, we built our relationship. Nathan would have lunch at the restaurant almost every day. On Sundays, I would go to their house for family lunch. I met other adoptive relatives, Mr. Howard's sister, Emily's cousins, close friends who were like family. Everyone welcomed me, integrated me, made me feel part of something bigger. It was like winning the emotional lottery after a lifetime of loss. But Nathan wasn't satisfied with just our reunion. As a lawyer, his sense of justice was deeply offended by everything that had happened to me, to him, to so many other women and children. He wanted to do something about it. "I'm going to sue everyone responsible," he declared one day, determined. "The Wallace family who sold you, the madam who sold me, the intermediaries, all of them." I was scared. It meant messing with powerful people, reliving trauma, exposing myself. "Son, so much time has passed," I argued. "Many of them must be dead by now. Others must be old, sick. What difference does it make now?" You can almost feel her hesitation, can't you? After finally finding a safe harbor after a lifetime at sea, who would willingly choose to sail back into the storm? But for Nathan, this was about more than just the past. It was about a public reckoning, a fight that would force Gloria to confront the very people and the very place that had tried to destroy her. He looked at me seriously, with an intensity that reminded me of myself when I was younger. "It makes all the difference, Mom. First, for the acknowledgement of what they did to you. Second, for justice, even if it's late. Third, to prevent others from continuing to do the same thing, thinking they'll get away with it." I couldn't argue with that. Deep down, I wanted justice too. I had only given up on it because I thought it was impossible. But now, with a lawyer for a son, determined, with knowledge and contacts, maybe it was possible. "All right," I finally agreed. "What do we need to do?" He smiled. That beautiful smile that I already loved so much. Start in Ohio, find the Wallace family, gather evidence, build the case, and so began our journey in search of justice. Nathan took a month's leave from the law firm where he worked. I left the restaurant in the hands of the staff I had trained over the years. We packed our bags and boarded a plane to Cleveland. My first time on a plane at 60 years old, I was returning to the city after more than 40 years. Returning not as the scared girl who had left, but as a mature, successful woman with her lawyer son by her side. Cleveland had changed a lot, but it was still recognizable. The smell, the colors, the light, the energy of the city were the same. Feeling the wind off the lake, hearing the strong Midwestern accent on the streets, eating a hot dog from a street vendor, all of it stirred something in me in a way I hadn't expected. It was as if a piece of me that had lain dormant for decades suddenly awoke. Nathan had done his homework. Even before we left Columbus, he had already located the Wallace family. Dr. Arthur had died 10 years ago, but Mrs. Margaret was still alive, over 80 years old, living in the same house in Shaker Heights. Her son Paul, my rapist, Nathan's biological father, had become a lawyer like his father. He had his own firm, was married, and had 3 children. It seemed that life had been good to them, while it had been hell for me. We decided not to confront them head on. First, Nathan wanted to gather evidence. We visited the old neighborhood. We spoke with people who still remembered the family. Carefully, without revealing too much, we asked about the maids who had worked there during that time. We managed to locate 2. One who had worked there before me, and another after. The stories they told were frighteningly similar to mine. The pattern was there. The hardest part was returning to the house. Nathan insisted that we needed photos of the location for the lawsuit. We stopped across the street. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but still imposing, well maintained. The high wall, the iron gate, the large tree in front it was all there, frozen in time. I felt my stomach churn, a cold sweat running down my back. "I can't go in," I confessed. "I can't even stand here looking at it." Nathan understood. He took me back to the hotel, then returned alone to take pictures, observe the movements, try to find out more. When he came back, he had news. I managed to speak with the current gardener. He's worked for the family for over 20 years. He said that at the back of the property, near the service area, there's a row of small rooms that already existed when he started working there. No one uses them anymore. They're abandoned, but the lady of the house never allowed them to be demolished. That's where we had stayed, me and the other girls who had passed through the house before and after me. The maids' quarters that were actually cells. It was a crime scene. Even after so many years, Mrs. Margaret hadn't gotten rid of them. Why? Guilt, fear, or simply indifference? Like someone who doesn't bother to clean up a mess that no one sees? From Cleveland, we went to Harlan County, my hometown. I wanted to see if I could find any of my siblings, or at least get some information about them. The town had also changed, grown, modernized a bit, but it still had that small town feel, the slow pace, the simplicity. The house where I grew up no longer existed. It had been demolished to make way for a hardware store. I felt a pang in my chest, another piece of my history erased. We managed to find my mother's death certificate at the local records office. She had passed away in 1988 of natural causes, according to the document. She would have been in her early 52s at the time. Too young. Probably died from hard work, from worry, from a heart broken by a daughter who never sent word again. I cried at the door of the records office, held by Nathan, feeling guilty even though I knew the fault wasn't mine. Of my siblings, we only got vague information. Some had moved to the capital, others to the south. One had died young. The youngest still lived in a neighboring town, but when we tried to locate him, we discovered he had also passed away a few years ago. It was as if my entire original family had dissolved, scattered, disappeared. Only I was left, and now, Nathan. After Ohio, we went to Athens. The Evergreen Lodge, the brothel where I was imprisoned for 18 years, no longer existed as such. The place had been sold after the police raid and turned into a simple motel on the side of the road. But the basic structure was the same: the large house, the rooms in the back, the high wall. Nathan took more photos, talked to old-timers in the area who remembered the brothel. I stayed in the car, unable to look directly at the place that had stolen nearly 2 decades of my life. Veronica, the madam, had been arrested in the raid, but she only served 8 years for promoting prostitution and was released. No one knows where she went after that. Maybe she died. Maybe she changed her name. Maybe she opened another brothel in some distant place. Justice at the time had been partial and insufficient. None of the victims were compensated. None received adequate psychological support. None had the crime of slave labor or false imprisonment recognized. With everything we managed to gather, Nathan began to build the case. "It will be difficult," he warned. "Many crimes have already passed the statute of limitations. Rape, false imprisonment, slave labor. Too much time has passed, but some can still be prosecuted. Human trafficking, child trafficking, document forgery, criminal conspiracy. And there's also the possibility of a civil lawsuit for moral damages, which has a longer statute of limitations. We won't get prison time for most of them," he explained frankly, "but we can get a judicial recognition of the crimes, compensation, and, most importantly, public exposure. Make everyone know what these people did. Destroy the reputation they built on the suffering of others. The process was long and painful. I had to testify several times, reliving every detail of the horror I had been through. I had to face Mrs. Margaret in court, old, frail, but still with that cold look I remembered so well. I had to listen to Paul, now a middle-aged man with graying hair, deny everything, say that I had made up the story, that I was crazy, that I wanted to extort money from a respectable family. The worst part was the threats. They started with anonymous phone calls to the restaurant, then notes left under the door of my apartment. Drop the lawsuit or you'll regret it. Accidents happen every day. Think carefully if it's worth it. I was scared, of course. I thought about giving up more than once, but Nathan insisted. He hired security for me, installed cameras at the restaurant and in my apartment, and taught me to always pay attention to who was following me on the street. The last straw was when the Wallace family's lawyers came with an offer. $500,000 for me to withdraw the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I could never speak about what had happened again. I could never accuse them publicly again. It was a lot of money, more than I had ever seen in my life, more than I could save by working at the restaurant for decades. A hell of a temptation, right? I told Nathan when they presented the offer. I could buy a new house, renovate the restaurant, secure my retirement. He looked at me seriously, but not judgmentally. It's your decision, Mom. No one can blame you if you accept. You've suffered enough. I was silent for a long time, thinking. When they threatened my life to drop the lawsuit, I thought about stopping everything. Would you have continued, even with the risk to your life? Or would you have taken the money they offered for your silence? What would you have done in my place? It's not easy to decide something like that when you've lived through so much horror, when you finally have a chance at a quiet life. The money would solve so many problems. A new house, a secure retirement, an end to the fight. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, the quiet, the peace. But then, I looked at Nathan, my son, the living proof of everything they had stolen. I thought of the girl I once was, whose future was sold for less than nothing. What was the price of a soul? $500,000? No. In the end, I refused. It wasn't for revenge. Revenge was a poison that would only hurt me more. It was for dignity. Accepting their money would be letting them put a price tag on my life, on my son's life, one last time. It would be their final act of ownership, and I was done being owned. Some things are not for sale. We're going all the way, I told Nathan, my voice no longer trembling. My story is not for sale. This is the moment Gloria reclaims the last piece of herself they tried to own. It was never about the money. It was about dignity. By refusing to be silenced, she chose to fight. Stay with us to hear how her battle for justice unfolds in the courtroom. His strategy was brilliant. In addition to the lawsuit, he started working with journalists, telling the story not just mine, but of other women who had gone through similar situations. Reports started appearing in local newspapers, then in national magazines, even on television programs. The story of the maid sold to a brothel who had her son stolen and, decades later, was reunited with him as a lawyer fighting for justice captured the public's imagination. Other victims began to come forward. Women who had worked at the Wallace house and suffered abuse. Women who had been sent to the same brothel in Athens. Families who had adopted babies through the same scheme, paying without knowing they were buying stolen children. It was as if we had opened a floodgate. And now, similar stories poured out from everywhere. The civil lawsuit came first. The judge, a woman in her 52nds, listened to all the testimonies, analyzed all the evidence, and delivered her verdict. The Wallace family was ordered to pay $500,000 in moral damages, ironically, the same amount they had offered in the settlement. In addition, they had to pay retroactive child support for all the years I couldn't work normally due to the trauma. And most importantly, the verdict officially recognized that I had been a victim of slave labor, false imprisonment, and human trafficking. The criminal case was more complicated. As Nathan had predicted, many crimes were past the statute of limitations. Paul was charged with rape, but could not be convicted because of the statute of limitations. The same happened with the crime of false imprisonment. However, the charges of human trafficking and document forgery held up. Mrs. Margaret and Paul were convicted, but because they were first-time offenders and elderly, in her case, they received light sentences that they could serve on probation. It wasn't the complete justice I had dreamed of, but it was something. Many people ask if I was disappointed. Of course I was. But I've learned that the justice of a courtroom and the peace in your soul are two different things. A prison sentence couldn't give me back the years I lost. But having the whole world know the truth, having the Wallace name stained forever, that's a kind of justice too. And it was enough for me to move forward. It was an official acknowledgement that I had been a victim, not a liar or a madwoman, as they had tried to portray me. It was the public exposure of their crimes, the destruction of the image of a respectable, traditional family that they had cultivated for decades. Paul lost clients at his law firm. He had to move to a different neighborhood because of the media harassment. Mrs. Margaret, they say, hardly leaves her house anymore, living as a recluse, ashamed to face her neighbors. The compensation money didn't give me back the lost years, nor did it erase the scars on my soul. But with it, I built something I never had. A place to call home, where no one could kick me out, sell me, or hurt me. With the compensation I received from the lawsuit, I was finally able to fulfill a dream. Buy my own place. No more rent, no more fear of being thrown out. No more having to ask permission to change a faucet or paint a wall. I stayed in Columbus for many years, running the restaurant and overseeing the project. But as I got older, the city felt too busy, and my bones began to ache for a quieter pace. 6 years ago, after I officially retired and left the restaurant in Megan's capable hands, I sold my place in Columbus and bought this small house here in Dayton. It's calmer, the cost of living is lower, and it's still close enough for Nathan and the grandkids to visit often. It's the perfect place to finally rest. In my early 60 seconds, I bought a simple but cozy apartment in a residential neighborhood of Columbus, one with a small balcony and enough space for when my son came to visit with his wife. I also invested in the Bluegrass Kitchen, my restaurant. I bought the property I had only been renting, renovated it, and replaced the kitchen equipment with more modern ones. I expanded the space. I didn't want to change the style much. I kept that home-cooked feel, the checkered tablecloths, the simple decor with paintings and southern crafts on the walls. But now everything was more comfortable, more functional, more truly mine. And here I am, Gloria May Henderson, 76 years old, sitting on my porch in Dayton, a quiet city I moved to 6 years ago after I retired. My life's work, my restaurant, and the project that grew from it, I left behind in Columbus, in the capable hands of my manager. I have my pots of medicinal herbs that I care for every day. Peppermint for nerves, ginger for the stomach, rosemary to ward off the evil eye. You might not believe in it, but it doesn't hurt to be careful, right? I like to sit here in the late afternoon, watching the world go by, thinking about how life comes full circle. Nathan and I built a relationship I never thought I would have in my life. It was strange at first, of course. How do you learn to be a mother to a grown man who already has a formed personality, tastes, quirks, all defined without your influence? And how did he learn to suddenly have two mothers, the biological one he had just met, and the adoptive one who had raised him his whole life with love? We had to invent our own way of being a family. Mrs. Joyce, his adoptive mother, was crucial in this process. She could have been jealous, could have felt threatened, could have played games to make our approach difficult. But she did the opposite. She invited me to lunch at her house, included me in parties, in family gatherings, treated me like a friend. He has room in his heart for both of us, she would say when I felt shy, afraid of taking her place. The more love in his life, the better. What a lesson in generosity that woman taught me. When Nathan and Emily announced they were going to have their first child, it was pure joy. I, who thought I would die without descendants, without family, without anyone of my blood in the world, was going to be a grandmother. Her pregnancy was smooth, but I was a nervous wreck, calling every day to see how she was, if she was eating right, if she was resting. Even Emily would joke, "Grandma Gloria, I'm the one who's pregnant, not you." James was born on a June morning. Beautiful, perfect, with fair skin like his mother and almond-shaped eyes just like Nathan as a baby, at least from the pictures they showed me of him. And the most incredible thing, he also had the leaf-shaped mark on his right arm, just like me, just like his father. 3 generations with the same mark. "It's the family signature," Nathan would joke, "so no one can doubt it's us." I held that baby in my arms and cried like I had never cried before in my life. It was a cry of joy, of gratitude, of amazement at the unpredictable paths life takes. I, who had been sold like an animal, who had had my own son torn from me without even being able to nurse him properly, was now rocking my grandson, knowing that he was born in love, that he would be raised with affection, that he would never come close to the horror that his grandmother and father had endured. 2 years later, Clara arrived, my granddaughter. She took after me more in her features. Darker skin, curly hair, a wide smile. She didn't have the birthmark, but she had the same stubborn streak they say I've always had. Determined since she was a baby, the kind that latches onto an idea and doesn't let go until she gets it. Just like her grandmother, Nathan would say when she put her foot down about something. Stubborn as a mule, but it's that stubbornness that helps you win in life. Even after retiring, I couldn't stay still. I had already passed the restaurant on. Megan, that first employee I hired when she was just a scared woman leaving an abusive relationship, had become the manager and then a partner. Now she was the one running the day-to-day operations, only consulting me on major decisions. But I still needed to occupy my mind and my hands with something useful. It was Nathan who had the idea. "Mom, why don't you start teaching Southern cooking classes? There are so many women who would benefit from learning a trade, having a way to earn money." The idea took hold. I started by giving free classes once a week at the community center. I taught simple recipes that could be made with cheap ingredients and sold. Fried chicken, biscuits, cornbread, things like that. Soon the class became well known, and the waiting list grew. Women of all kinds wanted to participate. Unemployed women, housewives wanting to supplement their income, young people without qualifications, immigrants from other states and even other countries. But I gave preference to the most vulnerable. Women leaving situations of domestic violence, single mothers with young children, homeless women, ex-convicts trying to start over. It wasn't just cooking I taught. It was independence. It was self-love. It was the certainty that they could manage on their own if they needed to. A woman with a pan and a stove never goes hungry, nor does she depend on any man, I would say. And I would tell my story, not all at once, as it was too heavy, but in pieces, when it was relevant, when it served as an example or a lesson. The course grew, moved to a larger space, had more days a week, more classes. I got sponsorship from local businesses, then a partnership with the city, then with an NGO that worked with women in vulnerable situations. Soon I was coordinating a team of teachers, all former students who had excelled and were now teaching others. The Bluegrass Kitchen and Soul, as the project came to be called, became a reference in Columbus and then in other cities in Ohio. More important than the course itself was the support network we created around it. The women didn't just come to learn how to cook. They came to talk, to vent, to ask for advice, to make friends. Many were isolated, with no family nearby, no friends. sometimes fleeing violent husbands or other dangerous situations. In the course, they found not only a trade, but solidarity, friendship, a community. Some stories were heartbreaking. Jessica, 22, 3 young children. Her husband broke her arm with an iron bar because dinner was cold. Rachel, 40, her partner threatened to kill her and the children if she tried to leave him, even put a gun to her head. Stephanie, 17, a local drug dealer had his eye on her, wanting to make her his woman by force. Her mother told her to leave the house to solve the problem on her own. There were stories you wouldn't believe actually happen. I began to realize that, besides teaching cooking, I needed to teach these women how to identify dangerous situations, to recognize warning signs, to leave abusive relationships. I created a part of the course that I internally called How to Identify Predators. Never advertised as such openly, of course, to not draw negative attention or put the participants at risk. It was disguised as self-knowledge and personal development, but in truth, it taught women to identify controlling behavior, psychological manipulation, isolation tactics, all the tricks predators use to trap their victims. When a man tries to distance you from your family and friends, that's the first red flag I taught. When he controls your money, decides what you can buy, questions every penny spent, that's the second. When he starts criticizing your clothes, your hair, your mannerisms, trying to lower your self-esteem, that's the third. When he takes your ID, your phone, controls who you talk to, that's the fourth. And I would list them based on my own experience and that of so many other women I had met throughout my life. I also taught them to be wary of promises that were too good to be true. No one offers a wonderful job to an uneducated young woman out of the blue. No one pays a huge salary for simple work. No one takes a stranger to a big city out of pure kindness. There's always an ulterior motive. Always. It was hard to speak like that, to plant the seed of suspicion in people who already had so little, but it was necessary. Better a little paranoia than a life of abuse. Some stories had a happy ending. Jessica, the one whose husband broke her arm, managed to leave him, got a job in a bakery with what she learned in the course, and now supports her children on her own. Rachel, the one with the violent husband, got a restraining order. She's selling sweets outside a school, saving money to buy a small house. Stephanie, the girl the drug dealer was after, we managed to send her to a cousin's house in Indianapolis, far from danger. She's working and studying to finish high school, but not all of them ended well. There were women who went back to their abusers because they had nowhere else to go. There were those who fell into new traps, new violent relationships, repeating the cycle. There was even one, Christine, whose ex-husband found her. And well, I don't need to go into detail. It was the saddest day of the project. I cried for a whole week, feeling guilty for not having done more, for not having seen the danger coming, for not having protected her better. Nathan helped me deal with that guilt. "Mom, you can't save everyone," he said. "You already do much more than most. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." It was hard to accept, but he was right. We do what we can with the tools we have, within the possibilities of each situation. No one saves anyone alone. You can't always change the course of a life, no matter how much you want to. Over time, the work with the Bluegrass Kitchen and Soul earned me recognition in the community. I won an award from the city for social service. I was the subject of a report in the local newspaper, even appeared on a regional television program as an example of social entrepreneurship. A nice title for something that, in my mind, was just the basics. Helping those in need with what I knew how to do. But the recognition that moved me the most came from the students themselves. On my 70th birthday, they organized a surprise party. More than 50 women who had been through the course over the years came, each bringing a dish they had learned from me. They made a handmade booklet with testimonials of how the course had changed their lives. One had opened her own small restaurant. Another sold prepared meals and had already bought a house. Another was also teaching cooking classes, spreading the knowledge. Several had left abusive relationships, rebuilt their lives, found independence. It was the best gift they could have given me, to know that my pain had not been in vain, that my experience served to save others. After the lawsuit against the Wallace family, I decided to make peace with my past. At 65, I returned to Harlan County, my hometown. This time, no longer chasing information for the lawsuit, but to reconnect with my roots. Nathan came with me. He wanted to see his mother's homeland, to understand where I had come from. The town had grown, modernized, but it still had that small-town feel, its own rhythm, its traditions. We went to the church where I was baptized, to the market where my mother bought groceries, to the places that marked my childhood. To my surprise, I found a distant cousin who still lived there, the daughter of an aunt I barely remembered. She recognized me on the street even after all this time. "Aren't you Gloria, Josepha's daughter? My God, we thought you were dead years ago." Through this cousin, I discovered that two of my brothers were still alive. One, Charlie, lived in Chicago and had a large family there. The other, Lily, the youngest, lived in Cleveland. The cousin had her phone number, which I called right away from a payphone in the town square. I, who was never one for technology, didn't have a cell phone at the time. When Lily answered and I identified myself, she was silent at first, then started crying so hard she could barely speak. We met the next day at a cafe in Cleveland. She had taken a bus as soon as she hung up the phone. She didn't want to wait another day. When we saw each other, time seemed to stand still. She was a 62-year-old woman with gray hair, wrinkles on her face, but she still had the same look in her eyes as the one-year-old girl I had left behind when I went to work in the city. We hugged and cried for so long that the waitresses at the cafe got worried, thinking some tragedy had occurred. "We looked for you so much," she said between sobs. "When you disappeared, Mom went to Cleveland, but the Wallaces said you had run off with a boyfriend to New York. She didn't believe it, but what could she do? It was her word against that of rich people. She died looking for you, Gloria. Until her last day, she would ask if there was any news of you. While Gloria was fighting for her future, a piece of her past was finally coming back into focus. It's a moment that brings both comfort and a fresh wave of grief, learning that her mother never, ever gave up hope. With this part of her soul finally at peace, what would Gloria do with the rest of her life? The final chapters of her journey are just as powerful. Keep listening. The meeting with Lily filled a hole in my soul that I didn't even know was still open. It was like recovering a piece of my identity, of my history. She told me everything that had happened to the family after I left. How my mother worked until she couldn't anymore to support the remaining children. How each one went their own way when they grew up. How life had been hard, but they carried on. Through Lily, I got in touch with Charlie in Chicago. He couldn't come to meet us in person, work, family, commitments, but we talked on the phone. It was a strange, somewhat formal conversation. He was only a 9-year-old boy when I left home. He remembered little of me, but still, he was my blood. It was a connection to a past that had been torn from me. I promised to visit him one day in Chicago, to meet the nephews and nieces I didn't even know I had, to recover some of the lost time. A promise I ended up keeping years later on a trip with Nathan and his family. I returned from that trip to Ohio with a lighter heart. I had reconnected with part of my original family. I had made peace with the past. I had shown my son where his maternal roots came from. Of course, there was still pain. There was irreparable loss. There was time that would never come back. But there was also healing. There was reconstruction. There was the feeling that finally, the circle of life was closing in some way. The years went by, and my life settled into a quiet routine. The Bluegrass Kitchen and Soul Project continued, more structured than ever, now with a professional team, partnerships with public agencies, and even sponsorship from large companies. I still taught a class now and then, but more as an inspirational figure than a regular teacher. My role was more that of a mentor, a counselor, a reference. The apartment in Columbus, I sold it and bought the little house in Dayton, a smaller, quieter city, where the cost of living was lower and the climate a little better for my joints, which were starting to complain about the weather. Nathan and his family still lived in Columbus, but they came to visit me at least once a month. The grandchildren were getting big. James was 10, Clara was 8, and they loved spending weekends at Grandma's house, where they could run in the yard, help take care of the garden, learn recipes from Kentucky, and listen to stories from when I was a girl in the mountains. One of the greatest joys of my life was when Nathan invited me to spend Christmas at his house with all the relatives, including his adoptive parents, Mr. Howard and Mrs. Joyce. It was the first time I had a real Christmas, with a decorated tree, a festive dinner, presents under the tree, everything I had only seen in movies and on TV. At the Wallace house, I spent Christmas working in the kitchen. At the brothel, it was just another day of work. Later, alone in Columbus, I had neither the spirit nor anyone to celebrate with. But now, in my early 62nds, I was experiencing my first real Christmas, surrounded by family, love, and a sense of belonging. I remember James, still a little boy, coming to give me a present he had made himself at school. A picture frame made of popsicle sticks with a photo of us, him and me, taken at my house. "So Grandma never forgets me," he said, hugging me with those thin little arms, as if I could ever forget, as if I didn't think of him and his sister every day, thanking God for this miracle of having a family again, having love again, having meaning in life again. In all these years, I've learned so much that I could write a whole book just of lessons. I learned that life is stronger than any suffering, that we can endure much more than we imagine, that there's always a way to move forward, even when it seems impossible. I learned that scars are not weaknesses. They are proof of resistance, of survival, of the fact that the pain has passed, but you are still here. I learned that family is not just about blood. It's about who welcomes you, who loves you, who respects you for who you are. I learned that there is no age to start over. I was almost 40 when I got out of captivity, an age that many people already consider too late for anything. Yet, I learned to read properly, started a business, built a new life, found a purpose, and continued to start over many times after that, at 60, at 70, and now at 76. As long as there is life, there is possibility. As long as you are breathing, there is a chance for a better day than the one before. I also learned to recognize what truly matters. After losing everything, family, freedom, dignity, and slowly regaining it, you start to value things that many people don't even notice. The pleasure of deciding what time you go to sleep and wake up, the freedom to eat what you want when you want, the luxury of locking your door and knowing no one will enter without your permission. The joy of seeing the sun rise without bars in front of it, of feeling the wind on your face without a wall blocking it, of walking down the street without fear of being hunted. In recent years, I have shared these lessons whenever I can. I give talks at schools, community centers, and women's groups. I tell simplified versions of my story, adapted for each audience, always focusing on overcoming adversity, on rebuilding, on hope. It's not to show off, nor to elicit pity. It's because I believe that my experience, as hard as it was, can light the way for others in the dark. Pain is only useful if you transform it into something productive. I often say in these talks, if it only hurts you, it's wasted suffering. But if you use it to grow, to help others, to prevent someone from going through the same thing, then it gains meaning. This is perhaps the most important lesson I've learned, The alchemy of transforming terrible experiences into useful wisdom, into active compassion, into an outstretched hand for those who need it. Today, sitting on my porch in Dayton, at 76 years old, with my plants, my grandchildren who come to visit, my work on the project that continues to grow, I feel a peace I never thought possible. It's not the peace of someone who has forgotten the suffering. That would be impossible. It's the peace of someone who has integrated it into their own story, who has made it a stepping stone instead of a prison, who has used the stones thrown at them to build a staircase instead of a wall. I look at the birthmark on my right arm, this little leaf that is now also on my son's arm and my grandson's, and I think about how something so small ended up being so important. It was this little mark that helped Nathan find me, that sealed our reunion, that confirmed what our hearts already knew. Sometimes I think it wasn't a coincidence. It was life, destiny, God, I don't know, leaving a clue, a way back, when all seemed lost forever. When the girls from the Bluegrass Kitchen and Soul Project ask me how I managed to survive so much horror and still have joy in my life, I always say the same thing: one day at a time, one step at a time, one problem at a time. There's no magic formula, no shortcut. It's getting up every morning, even when your body aches and your soul is heavy. It's doing what needs to be done, even without the will. It's believing that tomorrow can be better, even when today is unbearable. It's insisting on living, on continuing, on existing, even when everything and everyone seems to conspire against you. This stubbornness, this resistance, this strength I didn't even know I had, was what kept me alive in the worst moments. For many years, people asked if I had forgiven the Wallaces or Veronica. The truth is, I don't think about them enough to forgive them. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about absolving them of their sins. They will answer for those elsewhere. For me, the final step of healing was not forgiving them, but forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for surviving when others didn't. Forgiving myself for the choices I couldn't make. The true act of liberation was realizing that holding on to hatred was like letting them continue to live inside my head, rent-free. My peace was more valuable than my anger. By letting that anger go, I took back the last piece of myself they had a claim on. I think of the angels I met along the way. Rebecca, who held my hand as my son was born in that hell. Alice, who patiently taught me how to read again, opening the world to me one letter at a time. Mr. Walter, who saw a person, not a past, and gave me a chance when no one else would. And Mrs. Joyce, my son's adoptive mother, who welcomed me with an open heart instead of jealousy. They were the ones who planted the first seeds in that barren soil. Their small acts of kindness were the water and sun that allowed my faith in humanity to slowly, cautiously grow back. They taught me that while monsters are real, so are saints. Even if they don't wear halos sometimes, they just offer you a job, a book, or a kind word. And now, in the best moments, it's what makes me cherish every minute, every laugh with my grandchildren, every hug from my son, every achievement of the girls in the project, every sunrise on my porch. Because I know the value of every second of freedom, of every gesture of love, of every moment of peace. I know because I have known the opposite in the cruelest way possible. Sitting here on my porch in Dayton, I no longer see the scars on my soul as reminders of pain. They have become a map of a journey, each line a battle I have survived. I once believed the world was a predatory place, but now I see it as a garden where even in the most barren soil, kindness can sprout. My deepest realization is not that I survived, but that the pain did not destroy me. It was